legacy of the Burnett family here is in the town of Southborough. How much of the town of Southborough, as we know it today, is a result of the efforts of Joseph Burnett and his family and his large family of 10 kids? 12 kids? 12 kids, and what they also contributed to this town. So Al's going to talk a little bit about Deerfoot Farm and the Burnett House, and then Debbie Costing, Al Bazanson, and Debbie Costing. Debbie's going to talk about the family and their contributions to this town. So it's going to be a very interesting presentation. I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you all for coming. Al, this thing seems to go in and out.
Let's try putting it in here. This is work. Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you all.
It only goes up so high, Al.
All right, for coming to this special edition of the Dull Men's Club. I was singled out to talk because of my contributions to boredom at the club. I think the time that I spent a whole hour telling them about how fish sticks are made, and 75% of them went to sleep. They said, "You're the one." So what we have is a triple feature today. And the last of it will be John Rooney, Joe Hubley are here to answer questions about some late-breaking things that are coming up for town meeting. And that's really the most important part of this. Debbie and I will talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the Burnett fortune was made. And Debbie's going to talk about a little bit about the family and how they distributed that fortune to the benefit of the town. So, I gotta lower this because I can't click and talk here.
So I might as well say a few things while we're trying to get this going. For my part, similar to Al, it was in 2014, early 2014, that I knew really one thing about the Garfield house, and that was that it was the Garfield house. And even though at that time I had been in town for about 32 years, I was involved with raising a family and then involved in other local things. I really had not focused much on the town history, as many of us have not. And so I know Al became very curious, as did I, and started with Fences of Stone and learning so much. You all set, Al?
Yeah, here we go. Now, this is the Garfield house. At least that's what I thought it was until a couple of years ago. And then my interest got ignited when the girls stood down there with the sign. And I've learned a whole lot. And so what I'm going to talk about here for 15 minutes is really the backstory of the Burnett's, their businesses, how they did it, and which is a pretty remarkable story. And then Debbie will go on, and she's going to talk more about the family and what they did for this town to share that fortune. So a lot of you know that it was Vanilla that built that house, and that's a story that we'll tell just briefly here. But the Joseph Burnett, back around 1845, developed a vanilla extract. It was a better product, and just at the request of like one consumer, and it was such a good product, it turned into a colossal business. And the thread that runs through that is everything that he did was quality. He went out of his way to provide the best quality, and along with it, really use the best available technology, and along with that, fantastic marketing. Because it's one thing to be an inventor and invent something like a better extract, and it's a whole other deal to turn it into a successful business and maintain it. I found a book down at the Massachusetts Horticultural Society in Wellesley, and it was written by Robert Burnett in 1900, and it's about the last 50 years, for the 50 years in the business from 1850 to 1900, what the vanilla business was all about. They went down to Mexico. They found a place down there where there was vanilla grows all over the tropics. They found a place where there was better vanilla. They set up an operation. That place, by the way, is near Veracruz. This is the tallest mountain in Mexico, and there's all volcanic soil around there. It's extremely fertile soil, so hence there's a better vanilla. Well, so they set up an operation, a big operation in Mexico, and to bring that vanilla here, process it, and then market it. This is a little bit later on. This is a trolley car ad. Some of you know that trolley cars ran through Southborough here, and this was a big way to get your product out in front of people. And their advertising was. By the way, I grew up. From a little kid, I remember that bottle. My mother made. Custard and things like that from Burnett's vanilla. I remember that. I gotta stop on that one for a minute. I'm really not the best one to be talking about this because I found out last night that Terry Newman over there behind the camera makes her own vanilla extract. And there it is, from the beans. So there you go. Now, so anyway, Burnett's they knew how to get their product out in front of people. It was known through, they marketed it worldwide actually. This is their manufacturing plant in South Boston, down in what was the Army base. That building is still there. It's got a big B on it for Burnett. They went on from the extract, all kinds of other products, puddings and instant pies and that thing. Here's Hopalong Cassidy, who remembers him? And then spices, what have you. Here's a product. Back when people were lucky to get a bath once a week, they used this stuff to slather on themselves. Or just in like 13 years before 1933, this was a medicine that happened to have 12% alcohol. So but it was good for what ails you here, and they were able to sell that during that time. This is my favorite. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with boiled coffee, but I've been around boats for a long time, and that's what we have is boiled coffee. Some people call it cowboy coffee, but I thought it took a creative genius to figure out a product that would basically do the same thing as pouring a little cold water on the top of your coffee to settle the grounds, especially to make it out of codfish skin. But I guess you have to know how to make boiled coffee to appreciate that one. 1891, a Burnett display at a trade show, and 1893, the year before Joseph Burnett died, the Columbia Exposition in Chicago. It was a big award winner. So now on to the the dairy part of it, the Deerfoot part. This was advertised as Jersey cows, and most of you know that only one of these cows, the one on the right, is a Jersey. The others are Guernseys, which also, by the way, were important to the Deerfoot operation. In fact, both of those breeds were brought in very early by the Burnett's and introduced to the U.S. And this happens to be Wolf Pen Farm. This is a painting that Phyllis Burnett did. Burnett was the answer. So this is my favorite. Now, Debbie, there you go. This is a postcard that was at the Historical Society. And it would have been about 1898, right after the reservoir went in. And what you're looking at is Deerfoot Road, over there on the right, and Parkerville Road that runs right across, it intersects it. And then the mansion, you can see, Debbie, you can find that, Debbie?
Burnett one, or? This is Joseph's mansion, and here's Edward's.
Okay, now, a point. 84 Main Street, which is what we call this sometimes, you could think of it as an island because it's bordered by 3 streets. And then on the other side, the reservoir or the DCR land. So, you know, people are going to be able to circle this place at close range and, you know, enjoy the beauty of it and all of that if it survives. Now, here's another point. Over there by the Deerfoot Road Bridge, there was a grist mill, right by the Deerfoot. Most of you are familiar with that dam over there. Well, the last grist mill, Sawins, disappeared in 1895 when they were building the reservoir. But how many know that 44 years after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, a grist mill was erected there by Peter Bent, the first settler in Southborough. So this whole little part of Southborough is a very important historic area. And by the way, behind, for a long time it was known as Parker's Pond, the water right behind that dam, because at that time it was Parker's grist mill. And that was an important part of the Deerfoot Farm operation. It was where they harvested the ice, you know. Now, another thing is alongside the reservoir, right opposite the Burnett Mansion there, along that shore, by the way, it was, prior to that, it was Stony Brook. It was just a little narrow stream going there. Well, in that place, right directly behind the mansion, was the original Deerfoot Farm, which I think a lot of people, that's escaped their attention. And this is it. This photograph was taken by the Boston Water Board just before they went in there and destroyed it. Because right now the reservoir runs up to about the middle of that barn. And that's just within a year or two. I mean, they knew it was coming. And so that's when they built the bigger Deerfoot Farm south of there, down by where Trotter Farm is now. And there was both a sausage operation and a dairy operation here in the early days. And this farm, of course, was started by Joseph Burnett. And so so there along about the middle of the 1890s, and they had to move, they went over to Newton Street. And at the site of the current medical center, this was the sausage operation. And there's a lot of people in this room that remember it. And Lena Carloni, hold your hand up, would you please? Lena was there in World War II, making sausages. Yeah, maybe before that. I mean, how old are you, 105? Yeah, okay. But anyway, this is the sausage operation, which a lot of people in this room remember. And Deerfoot sausage was like an icon of Southborough. It was nationally known. In fact, it was advertised nationally on the radio. It consistently fetched a higher price than any other sausage, and this was their slogan. It was served at the White House. It was on restaurant menus. They put a placard on the table. We have Deerfoot sausage. It was used like people, when they were talking about financial and marketing models, they would talk about the Deerfoot label like people talk today about the Apple computer label. It was a symbol of quality. So now, the other part of the Deerfoot farm business, of course, was the dairy. And these are the barns that some of you here remember that were over there by Trotter School. Now, there's a very distinctive feature on these barns. By the way, I grew up on a dairy farm in Northborough. I know about barns. And we had our own dairy, Stirport Farm. The barn is still there. And we milked our own cows. We bought milk from other farmers. We pasteurized it, bottled it, had our own milk crews, did all that in a primitive way. But anyway, and these barns, the distinctive feature is that second story with that long row of windows. Now, another thing about, okay, some of you remember, in fact, I talked to Lena yesterday and she mentioned this one. Some of you know the story. A Deerfoot farm cow went to the South Pole with Admiral Byrd, and there's the cow. And this is Kay Allen milking that cow in 1935, which happens to be the year that I was born. Deerfoot was leading, they had patents on dairy equipment. They were a leader with technology. This is in-bottle pasteurization, which was unheard of. Now, Edward Burnett, he was the oldest son of Joseph, and he lived in this house, which is now gone, and nobody knows what happened to it or when, but the house was, his father-in-law was the poet James Russell Lowell, who spent his last days there, by the way. And Edward had served a term in the U.S. Congress. He was a friend of President Grover Cleveland. Cleveland stayed there when he was campaigning in Southborough. So it's a historic house. Nobody remembers it. It was lost sometime in the early 20th century. Nobody knows where it was, but I'll tell you where it is, where it was. If you go up Deerfoot Road and you see Bill Picardi's shiny 55 Chevy green pickup sitting out there, it was right under that pickup. So that's where that house was. Now, oh, and there was a great story written about it by Edward's daughter, Esther Lowell Cunningham, and that house we're talking about, that would be the lower one in this photo. And there's 57 pages in this book devoted to all kinds of very interesting stories about the Burnett family. Now, this, again, the Deerfoot Farm barns, here's another view of them, and you see, again, look again at that top story, the row of windows. So now, although we don't know much about Edward Burnett today in Southborough, if you go 900 miles down to the Great Smoky Mountains, you'll find out a whole lot about him. Because these are the barns that he designed and built at the famous Biltmore estate outside of Asheville. And you see that distinctive feature again on those barns. And that project was in the mid-1890s. The fellow on the left holding the tree up is Edward Burnett. In the middle is Richard Hunt, who was the architect for the Vanderbilt mansion. On the right, George Vanderbilt. And in the center on the ground, Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, the barns are still, and by the way, that whole project, that whole Biltmore fell on pretty hard times, and it was revived by one branch of the family, and they restored those barns, and today they're a huge tourist attraction. And by the way, I've seen photographs of the interior of Deerfoot barns, and it's very similar to this. The barns have been they've been repurposed, you might say, into a winery. And it's the most visited winery in the United States. You get over 600,000 visitors a year. And when you're standing in line to go into this winery, as I was last summer, I found myself standing beside a manure car, and it really got my attention because I know all about that. And you say, I said that Edward Burnett was a farm architect. Well, you have to grow up on a dairy farm to appreciate what that is. It's all about material handling, in and out. It's a lot of doggone work. And anything that can be done to reduce that work is a huge accomplishment. So anyway, what they did, so beginning when Burnett was there, they started a real dairy operation. Vanderbilt didn't know how to do anything on a small scale. And it became one of the largest dairies in the southeastern US. And I think it tells you here that they eventually sold off the business. But now, get this, when they sold the business, they kept only one product to themselves, their secret recipe for vanilla ice cream, Biltmore vanilla. And there's a very popular little refreshment stand there on the Biltmore estate, and people will stand in line to get that vanilla ice cream. So where did I get that idea? Now back to the past around here. A lot of you have seen this photograph. There's an enlargement of it that's going to be put up here in Courteville Hall. And this is if Edward Burnett stepped out of his house, if you recall where that was, to go over to the mansion, he would have to cross Stony Brook here. Now, this is looking back toward Deerfoot Road. This is, the mansion is out of sight to the right, but we're looking back toward Deerfoot Road. And Debbie, put the pointer on Sawin's gristmill. You can just make it out through the trees there. And that, just imagine, just imagine 44 years after Plymouth Rock, there was a gristmill there. Showing through the trees is a little stone shop which was really built to cut the stone for the mansion, to build the mansion. It later became, as a lot of people know, the site of the First Episcopal Church. It was a site of the Girl Scout meetings, and it was the home of the manager of Deerfoot Farm for a long time. So now, back to the future. This is pretty much what it looked, that same spot. This is what it looks like now. You see way over on the left is the carriage house. And here's another view from Parkerville Road. This, by the way, this side of the house, this was the main entrance. And there was a big piazza, a roof, and a circle where the horses would come up and discharge the people and go back out. So the current view of this might be a little bit stark, but it was really a whole lot different in its day. I took this photograph right after sunrise, so that what you're looking at is the reflection of the sun, the low sun. And this is a view from Deerfoot Road that gives you some of the close-ups of the details of the house. And finally, this photo I took last, obviously, in October. But when I took the photo, I was standing on the Sudbury Reservoir Trail on state park land, DCR, looking across what the U.S. National Park Service has designated a National Historic Site, the Sudbury Reservoir. Off to my left, just out of view, would have been was the gristmill that goes way back. So this is a current view of what we have. And I'm going to turn this over to Debbie, and she's going to tell you something about the family and what they did with that fortune that benefited Southborough.
Say a prayer out while you're.
Mine? Thank you, Al. I think we should, I want to take this moment to just, again, for those of you who don't know, Al, to get the sausages that we had this morning, these were custom-made sausages made by a special sausage manufacturer in Peabody, and Al tried out different types. He wanted a sausage that would be as close to the original, the authentic Deerfoot Farm sausage as we could, or as he could determine. I usually use the word we rather loosely. Put this way. Let's go down.
One other thing, the breakfast, the book I mentioned, Three Houses, right there, that breakfast comes from Edward Burnett's daughter. And the story was he would get up early, get on his horse, go all over the farm, which, by the way, at one time paid more than half the wages in Southborough. It was almost 1,000 acres. And he'd come back and have breakfast about 8 o'clock, consisting of sausage, baked potato with yellow cream, fried apples, and Johnny cake, except we substituted cornbread instead of Johnny cake. But anyway, that's where the idea of that breakfast came from. The sausage that you had, I worked with a sausage, Carl Sausage, which is now in Peabody. Some of you remember it used to be across from the Hilltop Steakhouse on Route 1 forever in Saugus. And that recipe, the different recipes lost, but that's called Marylebone sausage. It's an old London recipe, and it's made from very high quality cuts of pork, from ginger, we use nutmeg, and say there's a lot of sage in it. So that's, oh, and by the way, it was grilled, the sausage was made on Wednesday, and Dean Lewis grilled it at the spa, and he's got plenty left, and he's going to serve it this weekend.
Here I am. Thank you very much, Al. Thank you so much for that. And I am beyond thrilled to be here because in the last year and a half, I have, much to my friends' dismay, become quite obsessed with information about who lived in that house and what did they do. Because, as I said earlier, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I knew basically nothing. So I'm going to try to move along quickly here so that we can get to the third important part of the show, equal parts, which is Paul Cimino is here, and Joe Hubley, and is Paul Rooney, Mr. John Rooney, is he still here? He had to leave. Okay, thank you. So, this is Joseph Burnett. I will also kneel so that. Oh yes. So this is Joseph Burnett. He was born here in Southborough in 1820 on Gilmore Road. His father was a farmer and a rope maker. Thank you very much. A farmer and a rope maker, and he was inspired by his Uncle Joel to get an education. So he went to the Worcester College of Pharmacy, studied chemistry and pharmaceuticals, and then very quickly got a job in Boston at the Theodore Metcalf Company and as a chemist. His first big break was when he was hired, because of his known skill, to mix the ether for a very famous demonstration of anesthesia during surgery, and this was done at the famous Ether Dome at Mass General Hospital. A little bit later, the vanilla story kicked in. A woman came into his shop wanting to know if he could possibly mix as good a vanilla extract as she had been accustomed to using when she was living in Paris, because you could not get that here. At first, he said, well, no, that's really not what I do. I'm a chemist, I'm a pharmacist. But, and this is what made all the difference, he thought about it. He decided, why not give it a try? And that is what changed everything, made him a wealthy man, and that is what then enabled that family to give as much to this town as they did, which sadly, most of us know very, very little. So here are a couple more pictures of Burnett's Vanilla. They really knew how to market things. In 1847, he met the lovely Josephine Cutter, Joseph and Josephine, and they married a year later in 1848. He then decided to move back to his hometown, and the first house that they built, which you can see here, this is not what the house looks like now. It was originally a 2-story, kind of New England style stone house, but with a gable roof. Then, by 1860, both his family and his fortune had grown, and that was when it was expanded to this, with the 3rd story, the mansard roof, and the tower that you see above. There you see it sitting so magnificently on Stony Brook before the reservoir was built. And this is a view from Main Street, and you see that that was when it still had the tower, and you can see the porticos on the front that make it much more elegant. Am I blocking anyone's view? Oh, good, okay. You can see the porticos, the verandas, and back here in the background, over there, is where Deerfoot Farm had been before it got moved down to the Trottier location. Here's the family that lived in the house. They had 12 children, 11 of whom survived to adulthood, and many of them had very active and very productive, civic-minded lives. So here's a little bit about the legacy of the Burnett family in Southborough. First of all, most of you do probably know that Joseph Burnett first established the Episcopal Church here in Southborough and then built the building, funded entirely by him. He also established and built St. Mark's School. Now this is, I think, interesting because this is when it was first in existence, right at the very corner of Main Street and Route 85. So if you can see the stone wall that is here, does the red dot help? Yeah. Okay, good. So this stone wall is the one that you see now opposite the library going north on 85. These are the early buildings where Heritage Day is now held. And this was the home of Dr. A.L. Hobart that was then purchased by Burnett for the original school buildings. Joseph was the chairman of the building committee and a primary donor of the Southborough Town Hall. In 1852, Colonel Francis Fay, very famous Southborough man also, decided that it was adamant that Southborough have a library. So he, at that time, went to a town meeting and held up a sack of silver coins challenging everybody to give what they could so that the town could have a library. For most of the next 50 years, the collection of books was growing, but in a room, a space at the back of the town hall. It was not until 1911, when the Burnett family gave the land to the town that the library is now on, that the library was finally built. And it was originally known as the Colonel Francis Fay Library because he was the primary force behind the construction and establishment of the library. Now, the next generation down, this young woman is Louise Burnett. She married Charles Choate. They bought that house with the sole purpose of giving it to the town, the people of the town, so that it would be available for the townspeople as a place to meet, hold social gatherings and other events. This is Joseph and Josephine's daughter Esther, who married George Peabody Gardner, who, by the way, was the nephew of Isabella Stewart Gardner. And she and George gave 60 acres of land to St. Mark's School for a golf course that is now open to the public. Here are 11 of the 12 children. I love this picture. And as I said, one of them died before he was a year old. But up on the left is Josephine, who lived in what is known as the Kidder House on the property of the Fay School. It's still there. Joseph wanted all his children to live nearby. So even though they had homes in other places, he made sure that they had a place in Southborough within view at that time of the house. The next one to Josephine is Esther, who married a gardener. And then Ruth, I'll quickly say, she converted to Catholicism, much to the distress of her father and her brother, who was a Episcopal priest, vicar. But she didn't just become a Catholic, she became a nun. She didn't just become a nun, she became the Mother Superior of the Sacred Heart School that later became Manhattanville College, all as she was its president. Then down on the bottom we have Edward on the left, and then Harry, who was crippled, but he and John, who was over on the right, ran the Burnett Company after their father was too old. Robert here, this one here, took over running Deerfoot Farm. Waldo became the Episcopal vicar, and then Charles died young. He was in the railroad business. So that is just a little bit about the family. I could go on because I love this topic so much and got so fascinated, it just kept going, but I won't, because more things need to come. So we hope that if you do feel that you support saving this, that you will come and vote at town meeting, and please come and talk to your friends. Okay, so now we have Paul and Joe show. I think you should both come up. This is, my understanding is that you are available to answer questions that people might have. Did I misspeak?
No, I'm normally happy to answer questions about, if I can, about what's going on in the house. Joe, obviously, is the chair of historical. Maybe you can give that perspective.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces here. It was a wonderful breakfast. Thank you, Alan and Deb, for that presentation. Being the chair of the Historical Commission, and you're probably wondering where we're at, how we got to this point. So I'll try to give you a brief summary on how this all transpired. So, if you remember correctly, a couple of years ago, this was talked about. It was in the paper that the owner wanted to. He purchased the property. He was going to sell it. A developer was going to buy it. Then he learned that the developer was going to tear it down. There was a protest with Bridget Brady and some of her friends outside the house that were holding up the signs to save the Burnett house. And from there, the owner had second thoughts to sell it to this developer. So the developer, at the time, there was a clause in the contract for the purchase and sale. He reneged. The owner canceled the purchase and sale agreement with the developer. So during that time, the owner looked into, with the town, how do we preserve this building? How do we save this from demolition? How do we keep the town happy? How does the owner make out? So a lot of questions were raised, and there weren't a lot of answers, because I think this will be the second preservation restriction in Southborough if this all goes through. The first one, as you remember, is Chestnut Hill for the conservation restriction. So there was negotiation set up between Paul Semino, John Rooney, Board of Selectmen, Aldo Cipriano, and the current owner. So as negotiations went, it got more involved, it got a difficult process, and the owner wanted to explore more options. Well, this time around, it's different, because there's a set of guidelines, rules that you have to follow, and those rules are already established by the Mass Historical Commission. And if you read anything with CPC funding for the Community Preservation Act, there's a criteria that has to be followed. And believe me, it's lengthy, as Paul can attest to. We've been at this for quite a while. Believe me, I'll be glad when Wednesday comes, one way or the other. But I'm always confident it'll be a positive outcome. So Mass Historical said, let's not reinvent the wheel here. We already have a boilerplate draft that you can use, meaning to the owner. So the owner takes that, gets his counsel, they work on this preservation restriction with the town in negotiations, and Mass Historical has to give the final approval. And hopefully we'll have a letter in hand prior to town meeting that they have approved. We have the final draft of the preservation restriction posted on the town's website for anybody that wants to read it. I'm sure that Paul and I can answer some questions regarding certain sections of the preservation restrictions, but I'm not an attorney, so it's kind of hard to articulate the finer points of the restriction. But they're all within the parameters that are set up by Mass Historical. With that being said, we have an opportunity as a community on Monday night at town meeting to prevent the building from demolition. Ultimately, the current owner has a demolition permit which expires in May. So whatever action happens at town meeting, we don't know whether he would or he wouldn't. It's not something that I'd like to take the risk on of losing that home. And I gotta tell you, before the other night I attended Deb and Alan's presentation, just like you just saw this morning, about the Burnetts. And I had no idea half of this stuff. And it amazed me how involved they were in this community, the Burnett family. So it started with an awareness. The Historical Commission, the Southborough Historical Commission said, we cannot lose this property. We cannot have another building in this town be demolished. And you people out here know well more than I do that how many buildings we've lost in this town. And I say, growing up in Southborough, and my father and my mother driving by that place, it always had I never thought it would ever be faced with demolition. And I would hate to see that happen, and I'm sure most of you in this room would hate to see that happen. I'd like to see it all lit up. The owner has great plans for this property. It's going to look beautiful when he's done. The preservation restriction has a lot of guarantees for the town, the what ifs. You know, what if the moon spins out of orbit and crashes into the house? What happens then? So there are a lot of questions regarding the preservation restriction. And we have some pretty good answers. We've met with a lot of boards, committees, commissions to answer most of the questions that they have. We feel that we have pretty solid support between the CPC, Community Preservation Committee, the Advisory Board, Board of Selectmen, Historical Commission, the Planning Board. So most of your town boards and committees and commissions are on board with this saving the Burnett House. So you can thank sometimes the youth to raise awareness to us people that sometimes take things for granted, and I know I was one of them, is when I drove by and I saw the girls out there. I'm like, what the hell are they doing out here with signs and everything? And I'm like, maybe they're selling Kool-Aid or something, for lemonade out in front of the place. But I stopped and I talked to Krista Brady, and she told me I was moved by her commitment and her friends not to lose that mansion. So the owners agreed to a lot of things, a lot of benefits to the town. There's not as many as we probably like, but it's not common that we have public access. There are some places that do have public access. The owners agreed to allow the school children to tour the facility maybe a couple times a year. I'm sure that, you know, as time goes on, that once the building is done, the renovations are done, everything's complete, it's safe, the kids can certainly feel entertained doing that. So a lot of work has been done by a lot of people. Now it comes time that we have to go to town meeting Monday night and stay there till probably whenever this comes up, which Paul seems to think might come up relatively early after the budgets, to vote on this and to hear the presentations being said. So, to answer any questions, I'll let Paul speak, but hopefully you'll come to Wednesday night at town meeting at Trodia and support preservation of Southborough so we don't lose our icon. Thank you.
I don't have anything in particular to say. If people had questions, I think you're going to talk to that.
Any questions?
What's it gonna cost?
Would you like to answer the question? Well, $970,000 was the agreed upon price, which will be the money that will come from that will be coming out of the Community Preservation Act. It will not, you won't see any increase in your tax. If you actually see a tax bill, there's a little thing that says CPA, and then it's like, I don't know, 20-something, 30-something bucks, whatever it is. That money goes into the kitty. That's a state match. So some of the funding will be state, some of the funding will be from the community preservation.
Just to, does this work? No. Just to expand on that, not well?
No, it's not the other one.
All right. As part of the process, Joe mentioned the number, as part of the process, the town commissioned an appraisal. Actually, the CPC, in deliberating on this, retained a very highly qualified historic appraiser to, sorry about that, to tell us, you know, what the rights are worth that the owner is giving up. So the highest, best value of the house, if the owner were to develop it, if he were to tear it down and build houses, the value of the property is our appraiser tells us the value is $1.8 million. If we do the restriction that is being proposed, then the owner has no longer any right to tear the house down. He no longer has any right to subdivide the property. And that's relevant because there's enough room there to build houses without tearing this house down. So it would get crowded, but it could be done. So if we support, if town meeting decides to support the restrictions, then the value of what's left, in other words, the value of the property without the ability to develop it, was pegged at $775,000. And that includes some obligations of the owner to do some exterior restoration. So the difference between those two numbers is $1,045,000. And you're saying, okay, then why aren't we paying him that? Why are we paying him $970,000? Well, part of the negotiation was for him to take a little bit off the top for different reasons, and he agreed to do that. And so that's how we get to the purchase price of the rights at $970,000, which would be, pursuant to the article at town meeting, would be bonded over 10 years. And as Joe said, out of CPC money, it would not involve a tax increase. It would involve the expenditure of annual CPC funds that the town raises and also gets partially matched by the state.
Question? Those CPC funds that we have now, why do you need to bond if you have funds?
I think the chair of the CPC will speak to this on Monday, but there is, and she confirmed this last night, there is sufficient money in the CPC accounts today to just pay cash for this. But that would fairly significantly deplete what's there. Bonding it, therefore, lets us pay a little bit of, over time. It also, therefore, extends the burden of this into future years, so that as many generations or as many taxpayers who are going to benefit from it going forward also participate in paying for it. So if we did it all this year, then all of us would be would have contributed to that, but somebody who moved to town next year would not. So that's another reason to bond, in addition to just stretching it out a little bit.
And the cost of the bond would come out of the CPC funds?
That's correct. We would borrow the money and pay it back over 10 years from CPC funds. That's correct.
Thank you.
Does this agreement last forever, or could the owner ask for more money a few years from now?
Can you restate the question when you answer it?
Yes. So the question was, does this agreement last forever, or could the owner come back and ask for more money years from now? What we buy is a preservation restriction that gets recorded at the Worcester Registry. It's permanent, it's forever. So the town would forever control the rights to develop, to demolish or to develop the house or the property. So the answer is it's forever. It's a one-time purchase.
What are the plans for the house now with Jim?
He of course is free to do, other than, there are some obligations he must do to the exterior of the house and of the other buildings as well. Beyond that, he has some ideas, but he's not obligated. He could do a lot of different things. He has received a variance from the town to turn the house and the other buildings into a bed and breakfast, which would obviously take some investment on his part to do that. But there's a lot of, he could fix it up and live in it. He could fix up the outside because that's what he's obligated to do, and he could leave the inside the way it is. He's got a lot of options, and which one he'll eventually choose, I don't know.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So if the house is not demolished, does that mean that when the next history of Southborough is written, say in 75 years, that we won't be looking at a picture of a house that used to be here but got demolished in 2016, and that could actually be still in the town with its picture, how it looked in 2016 when it was being considered for demolition? How's that for a question?
I hope it looks like, in 4 years from now, what it used to look like when it was in its heyday. With the tower. Carol.
More of a suggestion than a question, but I've heard a lot of people say, I've lived in Southborough X number of years and I didn't know any anything about this, and myself included. Any consideration to a course, a program, a whatever part of the middle school, so that the up-and-coming generations are more aware of their town's history? Just a suggestion.
I think the question is that an educational component to make people aware of the history of that house in Southborough.
Yeah, maybe a middle school program, high school because it's a shared with North.
For a middle school program.
It's easy to sell, but for our 12, 13-year-olds who eventually will be making decisions in this town, possibly.
It's a great idea. I'm sure that there's plenty of groups, and the one that's already started is the Friends Group. And I'm sure that that's something that they could work with the school and along with Historical Commission. Historical Society is built for that. So there are plenty of components out there to do that. Anyone else?
Well, I just want to say, I thank you for saying that. I love that idea too, and it's something that the Friends Group has been talking about, is the fact that from what we understand, there is no current education instruction at all about the history of the town within the schools, which is why not only the children don't know the story, but their parents don't know it either. And back in 2014, somebody said to me, there's nothing historic about that house. And it's amazing that just because one doesn't know about the history of something, that then one can extrapolate that therefore there must be no history. So, thank you.
I have a question on the bond. The fact that it's bonded over 10 years, does that mean the owner gets a tenth of the money 1 year and a tenth second year?
So the question is, does the fact that we're bonding the purchase price over 10 years mean that it's going to be paid out in pieces to the owner each year? And the answer is no. We're borrowing the money. We're buying the restriction today. We get to record it in Worcester today, meaning this year, if we do it. So we will own the rights that we're buying immediately. So we pay for that immediately, but we pay it back. We pay back the bonding company over time.
And does he have a time frame within which to get things done?
Question is, does the owner have a time frame in which he's required to get things done? The answer is yes. It's 4 years, which I think for a project like that is pretty ambitious. I saw a hand over there. Maybe it went down. Yes, ma'am.
I heard the word friends of whom? Is there a group that's friends of the Save the House or can we join?
Friends of Burnett, Garfield House. Krista Brady, most of the parents that were involved, the parents of the children that were involved out there. I think Rebecca is still here.
Hewitt's here.
Hewitt's here. Hewitt, you could.
Sally's
Sally's here. Al. So I guess you guys could speak more to that than I can.
We would love more involvement. We would love more people to become friends of the Burnett Garfield House, partly to continue learning and spreading the history that there is, because as I said, it's really a shame that the history has been forgotten, and it's so significant history. So you can see me, Sally Waters is a member of the Friends Group, and Hewitt Heiserman in the back of the room is a member of the Friends Group. We would love more participation, especially with people who have more types of information and experiences, since I've only been here 33 years and don't know much.
Hewitt?
Thanks, Joe. My name is Hewitt Heiserman, and my wife Laura and I have lived here since 1995, and we have a son, Ben, who's in 11th grade. And I just want to make the comment. First of all, I want to thank Paul and Joe for their leadership over this the last 2 years. There have been a lot of twists and turns, but we're still here. And this house for Southborough is kind of like Monticello for Thomas Jefferson or Mount Vernon for George Washington. Those houses were in ruin, and they could have gone the way of the wrecking ball. It was close, and then a couple of people stood up and they were able to look out further into the future, and fortunately, they persevered. Mount Vernon gets 1 million visitors a year. This man, Joseph Burnett, he is Southborough's greatest native son and self-made man. And if we can preserve this house, it's a teaching lesson for our children and grandchildren for generations that we'll never know. And so I just want to say that there are some financial benefits from saving this house, but there are qualitative benefits as well. And so please come out on Monday and vote. Bring your wife, your husband, bring your best friend. And if they're a voter in town, call up your worst enemy, bury the hatchet, and bring them out as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have one more question. I personally believe in paying my bills off without interest. How much is this bond going to cost us in interest?
Shoot.
If you have the money, I personally would want to pay for it and not have to accrue interest.
Yeah, so the question is, why don't we just pay for the whole thing up front, because the bond will carry some interest. So the answer to the question of how much interest is, I don't know. There's flexibility in the warrant article to have it be anywhere from 10 to 20 years, and the finance director will make that decision ultimately. I will tell you that thanks to some hard work by our town administrator and our finance director and their staff and team over the last couple of years, Southborough currently has a AAA bond rating, which as of a little less than a year ago, which means that our borrowing is as cheap as it can possibly be. The reason to not, as I said earlier, to not do it all up front is because it preserves the ability to use other money for other things as well. If we did pay cash for this, we would be a little bit hamstrung this year in terms of supporting other things that might come along.
I may be speaking a little bit out of turn, but if any of you people saw the interview that Terry Newman back here did with John Della Pascoli about a year ago, and he toured the house and Terry took that all down. It's incredible. He is a history buff, and I would have to say that he's got nothing in his mind but putting that back to where it originally was. And I got to think he has the interest to do it. And once we get through all this, he's going to go ahead and make this thing look like the pictures that Al showed us.